Good evening and welcome to THST Official, the pod that gives you the latest news and information from the Tottenham Hotspur Supporters Trust. I'm Martin Buhagiar and I'm joined by Rachel Martin, Anthoulla Achilleos and Rob White. Hello guys, good evening.
Hi.
Now this evening we have another special guest for you, currently our co-chair of the Supporters Trust. Martin Cloake has been on our board since February 2014, I think I'm right in saying, and a Spurs fan since 1972. So good evening, Martin. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, good to keep the Martin quota up on these.
Absolutely, very important. Now, Martin specialises in a variety of different areas for us, so we're very lucky to have him on our board. But this evening we're going to be discussing a subject very close to his heart, which is governance. So I'm going to hand over to Anth, who I think is going to kick us off.
Yeah, Martin, first of all, thanks for coming onto the show and finally getting you on, which is good, to discuss governance. And I mean, at first glance, it's not the sexiest of subjects, is it, to be discussing, but I think it is a very important topic for us to be talking about, and in particular with current things that have been going on. So first, would you like to just tell us what is governance and why it is important in football matters?
Yeah, sure. You've been asked to come on and talk about governance and been described as a bit of an expert. People are probably thinking you need to get out more, but I think we all need to get out more at the moment, don't we? I think it kind of started off from, as we all did, from we just want to go and watch the football, really. But if you start caring about things that are happening in the game and you care that supporters need to be treated a bit better, I guess that's why you get interested in governance. So I think the short answer is if you care about things and you want to change things and you think the supporters being treated well matters, and you think that some of the rules, the way the game is run, needs to be changed, then that's governance and you need an interest in that. So it's the formal process, if you like, of the way the game is run. So to give a couple of specific examples, if a club's owners want to change the colour of the shirt, or if they want to move where the club plays from one town to another, and you think there should be a rule that says that the fans should at least be consulted, or maybe even that the owners aren't allowed to do that, that's governance. So that's the short explanation.
And a good one too.
Cool, thanks for that, Martin. Can you give us a quick, just tell us about this current review into governance in football. Who's doing it? What is the main remit and scope, and why is it happening now?
I can, and this is where it starts getting complicated because there's actually two reviews that are going on at the moment. So the dread words. There's one review that's being carried out by the Premier League itself into the way it's run, into its own governance, and that's partly been prompted by the big row over what was called Project Big Picture earlier this year, where there was a rumour, obviously totally unfounded, that some of the so-called bigger clubs were planning to break away and they wanted to change things and get a bigger share of the pie for themselves. The Premier League has then decided in the wake of that it needs to look at how it's run. And obviously what's interesting there is that people often talk about the Premier League as this separate organisation which runs the game. And the Premier League isn't a separate organisation at all. The Premier League is 20 Premier League clubs, all of whom have a vote. So when they say it's nothing to do with us, Gov, it's the Premier League, it is to do with them because they are the Premier League. Now, so the Premier League's reviewing its own governance, and in news that may surprise some viewers and listeners, as yet the fans haven't been asked to contribute to that. I was amazed as well, but there you go. You live and learn, don't you? There's also another review which is kind of sort of emerging a bit from some strange ways, and that is a government-led review into the way the game is run. And before the last general election, the Conservative Party in its manifesto put a commitment to having a fan-led review of football, which sounds quite good, but they didn't actually ask the fans whether they thought a fan-led review was a good idea. So again, there's a kind of flaw originally, but they've sort of come round to the idea a bit now that football needs to be looked at because of the way that football has been run and because of a lot of the things that have happened during the pandemic, really. I think there's been a lot of kind of public outcry about some of the things that have gone on. So we've got a slightly odd situation where a government, without wanting to be too political, I think it's fairly accurate to say that this current government is not necessarily one that you would think wanted to intervene very much in things. I think their view is that we need to let business especially get on with what it does. And I think even they have said, actually, there's a few issues here that we need to look at. So the fan organisations, the Football Supporters Association being the kind of national body in England, has said, well, this is great. We've been calling for this for quite a long time, and we've seen a few reviews that have gone in the past which haven't really delivered. We're not convinced that we want fans to lead that review, but we certainly want fans to be a part of it. And I think, you know, we've said quite a lot before that this word stakeholders is used in the kind of marketing BS sometimes about football. But if you want to talk about stakeholders, the only stakeholders that are regularly not consulted and are not seen on the same level as all of the others are the fans. And it would seem that there is a recognition of that. So the supporter groups have basically been lobbying people in the government and the opposition parties and saying, well, this is what we'd like to see. We're waiting for the DCMS, which is the Department for Culture, Media and Sport, which is responsible for sport, oddly enough, the clues in the name, to try and kind of kick that review off. And so we're at the kind of the very dull but vital stage now of drawing up terms of reference and working out what could go on. We're kind of reasonably optimistic that something solid and something good might come out of it. And that's despite the experience. I can remember at least 3 reviews of football being conducted during the time that I've been involved in this sort of stuff, and they've ended up being fairly disappointing, although one of them did lead to the establishment of supporters directs and the kind of pushing of the idea of fan ownership as a more structured way. So that's kind of where we are at the moment. Obviously the pandemic has held things up a little bit, but I think now as we're starting to look at you know, getting back into sport, and I think the government is also looking at sport as a way of demonstrating that, you know, Britain's back in business and we're getting things right again. So there is an interest in making sure that something which has got a high profile, which a lot of people value, is run properly. So, you know, let's take the optimistic line and say it might be that we get something out of it this time.
Thanks, Martin. Very interesting. And with that in mind, so what is the best that we as a supporters trust can get or can hope for from the review, and what sort of pressure can we apply, and you know, how much influence would we have in that?
God, the best we can hope for. Again, trying to do a short answer, I think mandatory fan representation at board level would be a good outcome, and that, you know, that's quite a big thing, because most football clubs are private companies and they would say, well, why the hell should we let you on? So, you know, we're looking at things like non-executive directors. We're looking at things like the B corporation model, which is particularly big in the States. And one of the things we often get told is that all of this stuff is very kind of utopian, isn't it? But it's not really going to happen. If you look at the way a lot of businesses are being run, they're starting to define what success looks like in different ways. So there's this word sustainability, which is used a lot at the moment. And about 10 years ago, that meant having some environmentally sound policies, making sure your carbon footprint wasn't very big. And it still means that, but it also means, is the way your business run at the moment going to mean that it's still going to be successful? It's still able to compete in 5 years or in 10 years' time? Are the practices that you put in place sustainable, or are they just things that are going to be there for now? Now, obviously, that's going to be an interesting application in football, because the model of English football, we're not talking about just the Premier League here, is essentially, and I know this is a bit of a simplification, but if you own a football club outside the Premier League, your business model is spend as much money as possible to get into the Premier League, stay there, and hope you don't get relegated. Mm-hmm. Now, obviously, you know, 20 clubs can do that and be in the Premier League, but most of them can't. So as a sustainable business model, that doesn't work. And that's the reason why we've seen quite a lot of clubs get into really serious financial problems. So there's a recognition that idea of sustainability is something that needs to be a bit more embedded in the game. Our argument is that we need grassroots supporter reps in there who are just representing fans, who may not necessarily just be fans, but they are representing the interests of fans. And I think that if you look at the way the business world works, the non-executive directors are often the people that perform that role. So we're looking at trying to see if we can build that in. My personal preference, if we could find a way of making it work, would be that there would be a licensing system. And in order to be able to play in any of the competitions like the Premier League or the FA Cup or whatever, you would have to have a non-executive director fan on the board who is accountable to supporters. They would also be members of the board as well. So it may be that they make decisions that supporters didn't agree with, but the point is they'd be accountable for them, and supporters could then vote them out and get somebody else in again as well. So that's one of the things that we'd like to see at club level. I think that having a more sustainable model at all levels of the football pyramid comes in as well. And that's where it gets tricky. And fans often say, well, in the end, we're just interested in their own club. But I don't actually think that's true. And I don't think that most fans think that's true, because what we've seen for years, and certainly in the time that I've been interested in football, is that fans, certainly in this country, value the pyramid. They value the idea that it is theoretically possible to go from the bottom to the top, that anyone's got a chance of winning. Now, I know people are saying, yeah, but if you're backed by a country, you've probably got a damn sight better chance than everybody else. And competition's been skewed, but that's a direction of travel that we don't want. So again, this idea of a sustainable game is saying that we want football that's better than it is at the moment, because actually if there is fairer competition, and it wouldn't be a sport if you knew who was going to win before it started. And a lot of people that are running the big clubs want to guarantee success, and that takes the pleasure of it away. And I think what we're saying is that if there is more competition and a more level playing field, and more clubs are able to genuinely compete, that makes it better for all of us. And if you win in that situation, it's much better if you've beaten good opposition than if you've got so far ahead of the opposition it doesn't really matter. You've only got to turn up. Let's not talk about thinking you've only got to turn up and thinking you could win games, because we go off on another tangent. So I think that's the bigger picture side of it. And it's one, again, that people often say it's a bit of a dream, that, isn't it? But I think that is something that is a value that's very dear to the hearts of most football fans, this idea that everyone's got a chance. When I was a kid, almost my kind of second team for a while was Nottingham Forest, because I remember them at the time when they won promotion from the old second division. They won the league title the next year. Then they won the European Cup the year after that, and then they won it again. Now, that probably could never happen now, and I think the game is a worse place because of that. So, and I think the whole sport would be stronger if there was more of a chance of that happening. So, but that's going to be a tougher nut to crack. But what it would mean is that fewer clubs go out of business pursuing this kind of impossible dream as well. And again, that involves some tough decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Martin. Going back to something you was sort of touching on earlier about the role of supporters and supporters trusts. Some people would say, well, why should supporters have anything, any input? Because it's a business and they're customers, and they're going to be customers for life. It's not, you don't just swap clubs because you don't like the product anymore, etc. Where do you think Spurs are, the Spurs board, on this one? And do you think what do you think their take is on the role of trusts and consulting with fans? Because I think one of the things that I find quite frustrating at times is the sort of idea that they're fans themselves, their friends are fans, so therefore they know what fans think. Yeah,
that's one we get a lot. People within the game saying, but we're fans too. People on the FA Council, they're all football fans, and they are. Daniel Levy is a Spurs fan. People that run clubs are fans of those clubs, and not always, but in lots of cases they are. The important difference is, and I think it's what I touched on before, is that they are not there just to represent the interests of fans. There are a number of conflicting interests. Fans aren't the only interests that are important. And I said before about this government review, one of the reasons we don't think it should be led by fans is because we don't think the fans are the single most important factor in the game. Players are quite important as well. Officials are important as well. People who run clubs are important. It's the whole caboose, that you want. But this thing that, we're fans too. And I listened to a podcast called the Fan Engagement Podcast quite a lot in some of the other really interesting stuff that I do in my exciting private life. That guy called Kevin Rye, who used to work for Supporters Direct, does. And he's had Paul Barber, who's the chief executive of Brighton, on recently, and Andy Ambler, who's head of professional engagement at the FA. And that, I'm a fan as well. That was all used there. But the point is that the job they do isn't solely to represent fans, and they're also not accountable to fans as well. And that idea of accountability is important. If you want to go back to a bit of Spurs history, Irving Scholar, when he took over the club in the 1980s, Irving Scholar was absolutely a Spurs fan. There was no question about that. Irving Scholar changed what we were as a club, as a business, from being something which was a private business, but which the shareholders and the board members couldn't take a dividend out of. Things had to be invested back in. And Spurs, like most English football clubs, was this kind of, it wasn't a kind of formal community model, but it was a sporting organisation. And he changed it, and he floated the club on the stock exchange, and he said that was the way forward. And he was able to do that because he was the chairman. He owned the club. He'd bought a majority of the shares, and the people that were with him controlled the shares as well. And he thought that was the right thing to do. But he didn't ask anybody's opinion on that. He didn't ask other Spurs fans' opinion on that at all. And it might well have been that Spurs fans would have said, you know what, Irving, this is a great idea. Let's do it. Or it might have been that they didn't. But the point is that he didn't have to ask them. So he could change the fundamental nature of what our football club was just because he was in charge. So when people say we're fans too, that's why that's not the whole story. Yeah, you're a fan, but you've got this really important thing, which is the power to change things. And again, we're not saying we want all of the power, but we just want some influence on there. And when you go and you look at some of the things that football club owners have done just over the last 10 or 15 years, changing the name of a team, changing the colour of a shirt, moving from one city to another, this is pretty fundamental stuff. And you mentioned it there, Rachel, didn't you? You said that if you want to, I think we bristle when people talk about fans as customers, but if you want to talk about us as customers or consumers, we've got that brand loyalty. And the reason that football is such an attractive business to a lot of people is because of that brand loyalty. We're not going to move somewhere else. Now, most business brands would kill for that sort of stuff as well. And that's why people are interested in the game. That's where the money is there to be made. So, but the reason that is there is because it's not just a corner shop or a car showroom or something like that. It's an institution, in our case, that has been built up since 1882. We've got those traditions of, the schoolboys founding the club under the lamppost and, all the arguments about the Spurs way or whatever. But it's a special thing. And every fan of every club will say their own club has got its special traditions. So, it's Julie Welsh has talked about this a lot, hasn't she, about football clubs. It sounds a bit fanciful being the repository of memories as well. But, when we go to watch the game, we want to watch some good football, but we go because we see people we like and we've got memories of things that were there before and different generations have gone as well. It means something to people more than just a business transaction. So, yes, we should have a part of the decision making on that, because all of those things could be taken away and people aren't accountable. And the irony of it is that whenever fans talk about, well, we should be able to do this, people will say, well, who do you represent? You're not, who are you accountable to? Well, who's the chairman of a football club accountable to? They'll say, oh, well, if people don't like me, I'll soon say. But, nobody can get rid of them. And you wouldn't necessarily want to, but it's just that, be accountable, consult a little bit more, try and take people with you. And I think, what we've got at the moment is that, again, a few people listening and watching this will scoff a bit, but you've got to remember that the bar is quite low by which these things are judged. But we've actually got one of the better relationships with our clubs board of most of the clubs. And it's not just us saying that to blow our own trumpet. The FSA regularly says, look at what they've got at Spurs. Yeah. And the board does sit down and talk to us. And look, we disagree a hell of a lot, but there's things we agree on. The point is they're doing that because they think it's a good idea. Somebody else could come along and go, I don't think it's a good idea. And then it's all gone. And one of the things that we're saying is that it should be a requirement. Why would you be afraid of it if you're really committed to it? So.
Yeah, no, completely agree. And like you said, it's that accountability that's missing at the moment that needs to be addressed. So just following on from that, what do you think, talking to the viewers and listeners now, could you tell them a bit more about potential decisions that the Spurs board might make in the next year or so that could have implications in the game and for our fans?
I suppose that the biggest one, it's difficult because you're kind of getting into supposition a little bit here, but there are, Project Big Picture raised some interesting questions. There's talk about a European Super League, breakaway European Super League. There's talk about changes to European competitions. And again, they're decisions that up to a point the board can make. They can decide what competitions to go into. So again, an example that I've used before, I think I wrote about it on our website, was that the Spurs board, or the board of any club, could decide to take their club into the kind of closed European Super League, which clubs don't qualify for on merit, which you're guaranteed a certain number of games and all the rest of it, which a lot of fans don't really want at the moment. Now, fans might decide, if that's the only game in town, we want to be in that European Super League, if that's the way it comes up, or they might not. But, the point is, again, there's no way that you've got of influence in the board, and that the board will say, we will take a decision that's in the best interest of the club. Well, that's in your opinion. But what about asking the fans? What about the formal say? So that's a potential decision that the board of Spurs or the board of any club could make. They could take their club out of one competition and into another competition without really being accountable to the fans. And to me, that just doesn't seem right. That's pretty fundamental. There are lots of other decisions, some of which we have influence on, some of which we wish we had more influence on, probably ticket pricing being the big one, although we have had some successes on the edges of that as well. But it's again trying to kind of build in that involvement and that consultation, and having a little bit of power to say, well, actually, there's a red line there. It might be that we disagree about the ticket price for this game, but we're going to have to agree to differ. But I think if you want to kind of turn out in red shirts with white sleeves, we want to say that that's a no-no, and that's not allowed. So, but you have to pick what you think's important.
Yeah, I mean, we can just about cope with the red just about sponsor name on the front, but that's as far as it's going to go.
Yeah, people get very exercised about that, don't they, as well? So,
yeah, totally. I saw someone put a design on Twitter recently where they just used, I think it was last year's third kit, but with the blue over the front. It looked fantastic.
Yeah.
That's by the by. Going back to the European Super League proposals, and also the looking at the amendments to the Champions League potential changes there. What do you think are the pitfalls that we need to all be looking out for, be aware of, and what might be the advantages?
I think the pitfall is people saying, "Oh, we hear this every few years," and it never really happens. And if you look at what's happened, it's now not the European Cup anymore. It's the European Champions League. And I mean, the original idea of the European Cup, was actually one of the kind of purest football ideas that there was, and it was an idea that was come up with by a journalist who was the editor of a French football newspaper, who said, "Wouldn't it be a good idea if we got the champion of each country to play in a knockout competition to find out who's the best team?" Now that's a really simple, beautiful idea, isn't it? And everyone really bought into that. And when I first started watching European football when I was a kid in the 70s, that's what it was. It was the champions were in the European Cup. And so we've had this slow move away to this league thing now. And I think the big problem with it is that the clubs that style themselves as the biggest clubs, they want to make sure that there's less chance of them getting knocked out. So where it all came from was that when Maradona was at Napoli and they won the title for the first time in that great team, they got drawn against Real Madrid in the first round of the European Cup, and Real Madrid knocked them out. But a few people said, hold on a minute, this is wrong, because we can't have one of these teams getting knocked out in the first round. We've got to find a way of making sure that the bigger teams stay in. And where that's got to now is that, and I'm sorry to kind of remind people of the year that Leicester won the league, but the year that Leicester won the league and they went into the Champions League, Agnelli, who's the chairman of Juventus, was really furious about this. And he was at a football conference talking about the need to kind of guarantee places for the bigger teams. And he said, it is an insult to me and the members of my family, after all we are put into Juventus, that we are forced to play teams like Leicester City. Right now, that's the attitude that's there at the top of the game, and that's what they want to change. They want a competition that isn't based on merit. So, if you're one of the so-called big teams and you haven't done very well lately, they'll invent something called the historical coefficient. So if you won a lot of competitions 10 years ago, then you can be in. I mean, I wish I could enter a few running races like that on the basis of what I could do 10 or 20 years ago, because I might have a bit of a chance, really. But I can't do that. So the clubs want guaranteed games. They want less chance of being knocked out. Fans don't want that, because watching a game where the result doesn't matter is a bit pointless. I think what they also want is more games to be played across more of the week. Although match-going fans are a minority of the global TV audience, they're an important part of it. And I think match-going fans would say, well, I don't necessarily want to have, it's expensive taking all that time off work and the money as well. If they get their way with some of the proposals for either reform or the European Super League, they're talking about domestic leagues being relegated to midweek games, so that we can have on those big broadcast slots at the weekend, we're going to have the European ties as well. And again, fans value their domestic competitions because that's what they identify with as well. So there's this danger. There are danger to the cup competitions. The League Cup could pretty much get wiped out. We could have no FA Cup replays at all, because there's got to be room for all these extra games that are being played in Europe as well. There's an issue there. Is it the kind of sport that we want? Is there the interest? Is there the jeopardy that gets us excited? But is it the fair thing to do? So that's the dangers of what they're looking for. And they're driven by saying that they want this guaranteed success and they want lots of extra money. So there's the European Super League is one proposal, which would be taking clubs completely out of the domestic leagues and maybe having the so-called 20 biggest clubs in Europe playing continually against each other all the time. Would that be interesting or not? That'd be interesting to see. But they're also talking about reforming the Champions League. So there's this stuff going on about the Swiss model at the moment, which sounds like a Kraftwerk album, doesn't it? That would be that you have 36 teams, no group stage, 10 games versus 10 different opponents that are picked out of a hat. The top 8 teams progress to the last 16. A team that played with an X in the month whose brother-in-law's son was spotted walking somebody's dog might get an away goal that counts triple. It's just complete madness, isn't it? There's no way that you can identify with that. So some of it is about trying to kind of protect the identity of football and the things that we value about it as well, as to try and stop this kind of, this kind of money grab, if you like. But the bottom line of all these reforms is the fundamental unfairness of wanting to guarantee that some teams, can always be in it and have as little chance as losing as possible. And it does present a problem, because teams will say, well, if that's going to happen, we want to be there. But there are more people that are not going to be in the Champions League or in a Super League than will be. It's a bit like the old thing, everyone could become the American president, but most people won't. So, where's the majority on this?
Yeah, I personally think sort of part of the horrible thing about, obviously there have been terrible things about the last year, but part of the horrible thing about not, the way that television has, we now expect as fans, we're seeing games every night, every day, different times of the day. And then, so the normal can easily change, which is what you're saying effectively. When we were kids, certain competitions like the FA Cup League competition, European Cup was a straight knockout, and then people can't remember those days. And it's quite amazing how quickly stuff can change. So this, the FSA, well, we've signed, haven't we? The Trust have signed a sort of a statement against effectively on our thoughts on the European Super League. Yeah. And an awful lot of other clubs, European fans have signed. We've sent that to have we received a response, do you know, Martin, from that?
Yeah, we did send that. Well, I mean, just to quickly read off what those key principles are, which was signed to by loads of fan groups across Europe. And I mean, one of the problems with this is that the most organised fans are the English and the German fans, and one of the problems that we're having is, again, without getting too political, that the English in certain quarters are not the most popular nation in Europe at the moment. No. So a lot of the kind of opposition that comes up is people saying, oh, well, they would say that, wouldn't they? It's also the richest league as well. So other leagues are looking at that and saying, well, we need to take them down a peg or two as well. There's only really kind of fan and press interest in a lot of this stuff in England and Germany, and in a lot of the other countries it isn't there. But so that's one of the problems that we've got of getting people interested in this and getting them to be aware of what the dangers are. The principles that we signed up to were, just very quickly, were promotion and relegation based on sporting performance, no to closed leagues or franchise football. So we want people to qualify in results, not through their history or heritage. Weekends are for domestic leagues. and we've said that that's to protect fan culture, home and away, no live broadcasts on Saturday at 3 o'clock to retain that at the moment. We want competitive leagues, so no to more concentration of wealth and the ongoing domination by a fixed few top clubs. And domestic football comes first, so protect the pyramid, protect the cup competitions. Now they're kind of fairly simple, wide-ranging basic principles, and there are obviously explanations and various things that come out of those as well. We wrote to the club and said, this is what we've signed up to. We would like an opinion from you. And as they often do, they confirmed that they'd received what we'd sent in, and they noted our view. They have listened to what we are saying. The thing you need to remember is that Spurs don't get a vote on this at all. So, and oddly, it's one of the times when a lot of fan sentiment and a lot of the sentiment of the clubs and also the Premier League itself is pretty much the same, that the Premier League doesn't particularly want a European Super League because it's a threat to the Premier League. So actually, there's a bit of alignment. The problem is that any vote is made by it's an executive committee, but because it's UEFA, they call itself a fancy name, so it's the UEFA Exco, because that sounds a bit more sexy. And that's 16 people, and they are elected by all of the federations. So in those elections, they are accountable to the people who elect them. So the English FA has got 1 vote, and the FA of Gibraltar has got 1 vote, and the FA of Finland has got 1 vote, and the FA of Belgium has got 1 vote. So the British count for 1 vote. And if the British don't like something but everybody else does, or the English, sorry, bad mistake. If the English like something and everybody else doesn't, then the English don't matter. And if the Germans don't like something but everybody else does, then their vote doesn't matter. So, it's the Exco. And on the Exco, people will remember Davor Suker and Zbigniew Buniew as well, their Polish goalkeeper. They're both members of the UEFA Exco. Along with 14 other people, but they get the vote. So the decision-making process is about influencing those people, and the influence that we've got is very limited. That the clubs themselves don't get to vote. The issue will be, as you said earlier on, that if a decision is taken by the Exco, then the clubs themselves have to decide whether they're going to go along with that, and that's where we get into something. But I think there's an awareness amongst even the so-called Big Six English clubs that this idea of a European Super League is not necessarily the best idea. And also the way things are looking at the moment, they're talking about there will be 5 clubs from England that went in there. So as there are a Big Six that are rumoured to be pushing for this, there's a fairly obvious problem for the people who are expert in maths there. So we'll have to see. But it would be good if the Spurs board and other boards, other clubs in England came out and expressed a view. I think we can understand why they're not. There's a certain extent of kind of keeping your cards close to your chest as well. But at the moment, it's not one of the kind of the key things to get the English Premier League and the English football authorities and the English clubs to speak out against it. It's about getting people in other countries to be interested, so that we can try and stop this attempted move to something which really wouldn't benefit any of us.
Thanks, Martin. One of the things I've just remembered, I'm going to digress slightly from something that Martin said earlier about poor owners and governors. I remember my regional press days in Bedfordshire reporting on the takeover of Luton Town, but then a championship club by a guy called John Gurney, who'd bought Bedford Rugby Club years before and tried to merge Bedford Rugby Club with Coventry Rugby Club, and then bought Luton Town with a vision of moving them to Milton Keynes. I don't know. I think they ended up with a club there. I'm not sure. And what at one point wanted to build a floating stadium on the motorway with an F1 track around it. Had all these grand plans, but it involved Luton not being in Luton. What then followed was that he sold the club to somebody else. Luton ended up eventually a couple of seasons later with a 30 points deduction, and ended up in the conference. And now they're only back now in the championship. So that's the best part of a decade to 15 years of that club. So it just shows you the kind of the people that are out there that would try and take advantage of football clubs and football fans, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Well, that's one of the things going back to the review. And I mean, what you often hear is that we couldn't possibly let the fans run clubs because they'd make a terrible mess of it. It's like, well, hold on a minute. Here's a list of people that have made a terrible mess of running football clubs. But the point is that most of the time, fans don't want to run clubs. They want to have a say in how their club is run. You know, and look, one of the things that hopefully might change, and it is a bit of a standing joke, but it is also worth repeating, is that, you know, we've got a thing called the owners and directors test, which is a test to see if you're a fit and proper person, that's the phrasing used, to run a football club. Now, the standing joke, which isn't too far from the truth, is that what does that test consist of? It consists of putting a piece of paper down in front of somebody that wants to buy a football club, and it says, there's a question on it which says, are you a fit and proper person? Yes or no? You tick yes, and you get to buy the football club. That's the test. Now, there probably needs to be a little bit more than that. And that's one of the things that potentially we could get changed. How do you do your due diligence? How do you make sure that the sort of situation that happened to Luton, for example, or, you know, that happened in Bury, or, you know, all the places where, you know, Exeter City, for example, where the club nearly went out of business, and it was the fans who saved that, and they still run the club, and that there are challenges there. You know, there's the AFC Wimbledon story. There's you know, Bournemouth was saved by its fans, and you look at clubs like Bournemouth and Portsmouth, for example, run into the ground by the existing businesses, saved by the fans' hard work and raising money, and then once it's kind of saved again, the business comes in and it buys it up. Now, again, you know, at Portsmouth, the fans voted to sell to Michael Eisner from Disney, but that was their decision. Some people didn't agree with that. Some people did. You're never going to have everybody agreeing with something, but at least they got to make the decision. To me, it kind of rankles a bit. It's like, you know, where were the big businesses when the club was in trouble? But they would say, well, why should we save something, you know, which is a bit of a basket case? Yeah. You know, and you let somebody else save it, and then you come in and board it, and, you know, that's convenient, isn't it?
And the funny thing with the whole John Gurney thing was that he'd just tried to do it with the local rugby club, and then passed the fit and proper persons test to buy a football club. But it was just absolutely mad. But just, Martin, for the viewers and listeners, you know, just explain again why it's so important that supporters have that formal route into these decisions. And also, I suppose there's a lot of Spurs fans listening who would think, if we're going to see a European Super League, would we want to see Spurs? Would we want Spurs to be a part of that? Where would we sit on that kind of decision?
I think you have to confront things when they happen. So probably the big example is that you look at FC United of Manchester. The people that formed FC United of Manchester decided that at that stage they'd had enough of what Manchester United was becoming as a club, and they were going to go off and they were going to do their own thing. Now, there's still some fairly bitter divisions over that, and there are Manchester United fans who say that, you know, they shouldn't really have left the club. And, you know, the thing about changing the club you support is quite a big thing with us as football supporters, isn't it, as well? But, you know, that was their line in the sand. That's what they decided to do, and everybody has got that choice. So on something like the European Super League, you know, we would have to see. I suspect that most Spurs fans would say, well, if it's going to happen, we would want to be in it. But I'm not so sure that it would be as big a majority as people think, because there's quite a lot of fans already, and we hear it when we go to matches and we talk to people, where people are saying, you know what, I've stopped really caring about things as much as I used to, and actually I don't think it's important, and there is too much football and there is whatever as well. So people have to look at, you know, what's in front of them. I think the important thing to do is not let it get to the stage where we have to decide, but because that's the way often wrong decisions are taken and bad situations come out, where people go, look, basically this has really already happened, it's just a matter of time, you've got to go along with it. And then so that takes it back to, why should supporters have a voice? Because we do want things to go in a particular way, and we want to influence things, and if we didn't want that, we would just be sitting here moaning. We would be, you know, having a whinge on a podcast or whatever. Now, I spent a long time writing stuff for fanzines and having a couple of beers in the pub and complaining about what was wrong or whatever. And one of the reasons I got involved in this, because I thought, well, let's try and at least see if we can make a difference. I didn't think it made me more important than anybody else, or I didn't think that there was a built-in way that a supporters trust could have more influence or whatever, but I just thought it was worth trying to make it work. And I think it's important, actually, I think it's important in all walks of life for people to try and make a difference to what happens around them, to be an active participant rather than somebody who just lets things happen to you as well. So I suppose that's a basic philosophical principle. Why should supporters have a voice? But I also think, for all of the reasons we talked about, because we value the game, because these are decisions that are taken that affect us, you know, and I'll always go back to it. It's a really emotive point, but one of the reasons why I got as involved as I did was because of Hillsborough, and what happened at Hillsborough, and what almost happened to Spurs fans at Hillsborough 8 years before, I think, wasn't it? What was a result of football fans just being seen as this big mass of people who weren't human beings, who were a potential problem, who had to be dealt with. And that's probably one of the things that I kind of keep going with as well, because, you know, we are individuals with all of the difficulties that makes, and all the difficulties of trying to get everybody to agree. You know, the old joke, you get 10 Spurs fans together in a pub and there's 12 opinions, aren't there, as well? Again, most clubs fans would say that, wouldn't they? So it's just, you know, it's the importance of trying to make a difference, really, and it matters because it affects, you know, the money in our pocket. It affects, you know, life or death in the case of Hillsborough. You know, it doesn't often get to that, but sometimes it does as well. So these things are important, and it's important the fans are considered. And I think unless you, in most walks of life, unless you speak up for yourself, no one's going to listen to you, are they? But you can also try and speak up for people that aren't able to speak up as well, which sounds terribly noble, but that is part of what we do. It's a balancing act, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that's been really heartwarming since I joined the Trust board and learned much more about the work that we do and the relationship with the FSA and, you know, to use Sepp Blatter's ghastly expression of the football family, actually there's much more of a football family than you would think, and it isn't the one that Sepp Blatter talks about.
Yes.
How would you answer people who say, well, you know, you're the Trust, you're just a group of people making, you know, lobbying the club and everything. You're 10 people. We don't agree with you. As you said, you know, there's loads of different views. Could you just say a little bit about how we do actually try and make sure that we are representing fans, but obviously also that we have to make a decision on what our policy is on these things?
Yeah, I think it's the same problem that any membership organisation has got, isn't it? Is that in the end, sometimes you've got to show leadership, and you've got to argue for a point of view. You've got to be prepared to lose that argument. I think the most important thing is that we're accountable. We're all elected once every 2 years. Anybody who's a full member of the Trust can stand. All of those people can vote, and if they don't like what people have done, then they can get rid of them, and they can come in and do something else. I think people expect us to take decisions on things, and if we take a stance or we take a decision on things, then we're going to be judged on that. We have to be careful, and I mean, we've had these discussions at board meetings that we don't just say, you know, what does Rachel want, what does Rob want, you know, what does Martin want to do? It's like, well, and there are sometimes that, you know, I've wanted to do things which I've just thought, I don't think our members are going to go with this, and I think we've all had that, and we would be foolish if we didn't think that. Because then we would just be, to use a vernacular, a bunch of gobshites. We would be abusing our power. You know, just because you're on the board of a supporters trust doesn't mean that you can speak for every single person. But we've never claimed to speak for every Spurs fan. We claim to speak for our members, and we've got as democratic a process as we've possibly got. Sometimes we might not have gone in hard enough on things because we know that there are. You know, we asked the club a couple of years ago to explain why they hadn't signed a player over 2 transfer windows. Some fans said, you're getting a bit above your station there, aren't you? You've overstepped the mark. And we've got other people who say, you know, we're afraid of the board and we just like the tea and biscuits at the board meetings, of which there are none, which is just coming up. You know, we just want to stay in with the board. Well, yes, we want to keep having the conversation, but we're going to have that conversation, put an independent point of view forward, and sometimes agree to differ. You know, do we have an effect? Well, you know, probably the biggest one. I mean, you talked about the heartwarming thing, but it was at the start of the pandemic. I didn't think it would happen when the club decided that it was going to apply for furlough and it's going to put its staff on reduced wages. And there was a huge outcry about that. And you know, we could have gone and organised a demo outside the stadium and had some banners and some megaphones. But what we did was that we tried to kind of channel that energy and that anger. And we talked to our contacts in the press and we said to the club, look, you've got a problem here. People think you're wrong. Here's how we think you should put it right. And in the end, they reversed on that. Now, that style of work isn't to everybody's liking. Other supporter groups will do it differently. I think it's probably safe to say, you know, we've got a decent relationship with the Spirit of Shankly at Liverpool, but Liverpool's organised fan base is pretty different to Tottenham's organised fan base. And we've got to take that on board. You know, have we got it right? I think that we have got it right because not enough people have said you're completely wrong. And, you know, there's criticism and there's a lot of noise about stuff as well. But actually, I think that people think that generally we're getting it right. But it's tricky. And I think we've all been in a situation where you just think, if you're a member of an organisation, you wish they'd said exactly what you were thinking. And often some of the fiercest arguments that we have are people are just basically saying, you haven't said what I think. And it's like, well, no, we haven't. But, so it seems to be news sometimes to people that, they might want to sack the manager, but another fan doesn't want to sack the manager. Well, and we would never get involved in that decision anyway. But we would say, can you explain why you've sacked the manager or why you've appointed that manager? And we did ask that, which is another time when they noted our request. Hear what they thought. But maybe that was for the best.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we also do quite extensive surveys, don't we, at the end of the season? And, we do seek the views of our fans, our fans, Spurs fans,
I'm one of your
supporter trust members.
we do, and there's always better ways of doing it. But equally, people don't. I was a member of the Independent Supporters Association years ago, and they used to meet on a match day in Tottenham Sports Centre across the road from the old stadium. And discussions about that, and people would say, well, I want to go to a match, I want to have a couple of beers with my mate, and I want to watch the football. I don't really want to go to a meeting, and I'm probably in that camp. But then you say, okay, well, we'll have a meeting on Tuesday night then. I said, well, I'm not in Tottenham on Tuesday night. I mean, I don't really want to trek all the way up there. I've got to go out for 2 games this week as well. So, how do you get people's views on board? And we can do virtual meetings, we can do surveys. But we go to games and we talk to people and we make it our business to listen, and we try and be as approachable as possible. And again, I'd say anybody watching or listening to this, that there's an email address on our website. There's a forum for members to get involved in. You can talk to us. We don't try and stay aloof and above everybody. We don't think we're better than anybody else. Come and talk to us. Have a discussion with us. Put an idea forward. Float something. And most of you got involved because at some stage or other you went, actually, what do you do here, or how do you do that, or is there something I can help out with? And here you are, and it's not a closed shop. It's not handpicked stuff. Anybody can get involved. I wasn't involved for years, and then thought I'd better stop shooting my mouth off and actually try and do something. So here I am shooting my mouth off again.
Brilliant. I should say as well, Rachel, we're all your fans. You know that. That goes without saying.
Yeah,
It's sickening.
But that's it for this pod. I really enjoyed it. It's been really good, and it's one of those, as we said at the start, governance. It's a subject matter that doesn't sound very exciting, but when you go into the detail, it should resonate and really matter to every football fan, no matter who you support, because it's about your rights and it's about your club and it's protecting your club, and it's such a big part of our lives that it remains so important to us. So thank you to all those tuning in or watching or listening. Don't forget that obviously all of our previous episodes are available on YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, or via our website THSTofficial.com. If you're on that website, while you're there, you can obviously become a member of the trust. Please do, and if you do that, then you can join in and have a conversation with us on our forums, so on our forum, not plural. So please do that as well. And if you have any ideas or suggestions for podcast topics, email us at info@THSTofficial.com. We would love to hear from you and your ideas. All that's left is for me to thank, again, you guys for tuning in, and also to thank Martin, Rachel, and Rob for joining us. Thank you very much indeed.
Pleasure.
As always.
Absolutely. It's always good fun. We will be back shortly with another pod. Keep your eyes out and your ears out for our next edition, an episode. It shouldn't be too long. We will see you soon, and obviously we will end by saying, come on you Spurs.
Come on you Spurs.